Hello, and welcome to the Addison Gallery of American Art and to the exhibition Wayfinding, Contemporary Artists, Critical Dialogues, and the Sidney R Knafel Map Collection, which brings together the work of 6 contemporary artists, Andrea Chung, Heidi Whitman, Josh Franco, Liz Collins, Spencer Finch, and Sonny Assu. I'm Allison Kemmerer. I'm the interim director at the Addison and the senior curator of contemporary art.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Sparling-Williams, and I'm the associate curator at the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum. This exhibition, Wayfinding, was one of the very first projects I started working on upon my arrival at the Addison in the summer of 2017. At the time, Allison, my then supervisor and co-conspirator, had invited me to explore ways to engage through exhibition this collection of extraordinary historic maps, which was gifted to Phillips Academy in 2011 by Sidney R Knafel, class of 1948. Immediately upon my arrival, I was really inspired by Addison's renowned Edward E. Elson Artisan Residency Program. I thought it would be interesting to examine these historic maps through the work of contemporary artists, which is ultimately how the exhibition was formed. In 2018 and 2019, the Addison invited all 6 artists to be in residence, some making multiple trips and others studying the digital archives from afar. They were asked to create brand new work inspired by the maps and that would generate new inroads for understanding the map's complexity and significance in this present moment.
Before we take you through the galleries, just a little bit of information about the map collection itself. Donated to Phillips Academy in 2011 by alumnus Sidney Knafel, the map collection is a unique holding of atlases, maps, and globes dating from 1434 through the 19th century that as a group document Europeans' developing understanding of the world over 4 centuries. Mr. Knafel collected the items as a personal passion inspired by looking out over the Atlantic from Martha's Vineyard and imagining how coastal New England and this land must have struck those Europeans who arrived half a millennium ago. The maps range from medieval mappamundi, which are world maps that blend history, geography, and spiritual concepts into diagrams of the known world, to Mediterranean sea charts derived from sailors' written observations, to maps searching to incorporate Ptolemy's cartographic ideas, to those that record ever-increasing European exploration and colonization, to increasingly more sophisticated recordings of land masses, shorelines, and settlements of the North American continent. Captivating for both their aesthetic qualities and historical implications, these maps, although representative of only one perspective, are illuminating windows into the European process of discovery. The collection is housed in the school's library and available for and frequently used as teaching tools in Phillips Academy classes from a variety of disciplines. In addition, the entire collection is digitized and accessible to all. The maps you see on the introductory wall of the exhibition are among those that the wayfinding artists found particularly interesting and as a result inspired their artistic responses.
The exhibition is laid out so that one could explore the work in any order. However, for the purposes of our tour today, we will start with the immersive work of artist Josh Franco before moving to the airy and minimal works of Spencer Finch. We will then explore the visually explosive work of Heidi Whitman before moving to the vibrant, geometric, and at times whimsical shapes and patterns of Liz Collins. This tour will end with 3 large objects, 2 video arcades and a planetarium by artists Sonny Assu and Andrea Chung, respectively. Let's get started.
An arrangement of speckled blue and black rocks of various jagged shapes and sizes encompass the tongue of a serpent. The rocks, raw turquoise mined near the Cerrillos Hill mining district in New Mexico, part of a long chain of ecological extraction from the most expansive prehistoric mining site and largest single deposit of turquoise known in North America. Nearby, several sheets containing carefully rendered glyphic drawings on handmade paper depict maps of the area that now makes up present-day West Texas. These glyphs have been created by multimodal artist Josh Franco. Works in this room, as well as these images specifically, were inspired by the Lipan Apache pictographs the artist encountered at Hueco Tanks, a state park and historic site in El Paso County, Texas, near the state's northwest border with New Mexico, a 3-hour drive from Franco's hometown in Marfa. The earliest pictographs found in the area were created between 6000 and 3000 BC by the makers of the desert archaic culture and privileged geometric and abstract designs painted across the rocky terrain using mineral colors that would eventually bind to desert surfaces as it aged. Later drawings produced between 6000 BC and 450 AD began to incorporate human figures and animals. Franco's piece in this gallery, Snake Atlas, Serpent Leads to Water, for my father who was bitten, so the rattler also resides in me, fills the entire space. The rocks earlier described represent a pool at the center of the floor, and at the end of a hulking rattlesnake, also rendered in rocks and precious stones, and surrounded by aqueous glyphic drawings and a tessellation of painted projector slides, an enshrined rattlesnake head once owned by the artist Robert Smithson. Water, among other powerful signifiers, are used in Franco's work as inspiration, as is the spiritual spatial proximity of the artist's project to this vast landscape known for its natural rock basins or huecos that would hold drain water for months at a time, allowing early inhabitants to survive the harsh desert environment. As you see, the room is painted in these warm colors and the cool blueness of the sky to give the sense of this embodied experience within this natural rock environment. These historic peoples created networks of pictographs that aligned, for example, with the sun's rays at specific times throughout the year. Along with other artists in this exhibition, Franco's work is multi-layered. It's complex, analogous to, if not represented within, the historic maps found in the Sydney Knafel Map Collection.
Hi, I'm Josh T. Franco. I'm going to answer some questions about my contribution to wayfinding. I was definitely drawn to the materiality of the maps, literally the paper and the parchment that they exist on, and that was the first encounter with this project as a whole, was coming to the Addison, having the maps pulled out, thank you very much, and having them laid out and being able to be really close with them, to even touch them, carefully and in controlled conditions. It's just powerful to hold something that's 400 or 500 years old, that the maker had in their hands that long ago. As the project developed, I honed in on about 22 maps that depict the area of West Texas, or roughly in some cases. The shapes of the land masses change a lot over centuries, so it was kind of a guess. But if it looked like a map that contained the area now known as West Texas, that was one that I included in my thinking and in my reproductions for the atlas itself. There are the notions of mapping that are in the Knafel maps themselves about latitude, longitude, travel, exploration. I wanted to bring that together with notions of mapping that exist in West Texas, where I'm from. And I was thinking particularly about all of the ancient pictographs that indigenous Jumano people, Mogollon people, Apache and Comanche people have left throughout the area over time. And many of those are wayfinding devices. Some are astronomical, depicting stars and things, but others are very practical things like a straight snake. You can often assume that the head of the snake points to a source of water, which is really important in a desert region. So my project brings together those kind of European, Euro-American mapping conventions with these indigenous pictograph-based conventions that are literally embedded in the land rather than on a movable piece of paper. And in my process, it's meant a lot of time with those pictographs, so a camping trip was a big part of that, and a couple of trips out there. I think the music is a really important part of this, and it's a nice thing that people can experience, whether they're in the gallery where it's looping or with their headphones at home looking at images or taking the 3D tour. And really, when I was working with Chad Turner, who made the music, I had this idea I gave him of study. So the whole room, as an artist, I try to make spaces that feel like scriptorium, which are the rooms where, for instance, medieval monks would copy out the Bible by hand before passing on a master copy to the next monastery. So I wanted to create that sense of a scriptorium for viewers to come study the maps as I'm presenting them to them in that space. So really, I just want you to have the feeling of being in high school, having a lot of emotions and thoughts and wanting to be alone. I wanted to be alone a lot. I still like to be alone a lot. I think solitude goes hand in hand with studying a lot of times. So that's the feeling I hope you get. Like you're having that really deep time with yourself, but also with all of these ancient loaded gifts from our ancestors that are both the Knafel maps and the pictographs from West Texas. I hope you all enjoy Snake Atlas, and thanks so much.
Operating at the intersection of art and science, Spencer Finch's work raises questions about perception, memory, experience, and time. Methodically investigating the mysteries of perception and the natural world, Finch attempts to depict the most elusive, even invisible subjects: a breeze through a window, the flight of a bee, the color of fog, or even the color of the universe. He uses precise instruments such as light meters, colorimeters, and anemometers, as well as his own perception to recreate these experiences in varied media. Ironically, this emphasis on accuracy does not reveal a single empirical truth, but rather underscores the ephemeral nature of the observed world and the way reality or truth is filtered through individual perception. Finch has remarked on how doing a scientific experiment over and over has an analog in the way artists work via seriality. Scientists and artists do something again and again to get closer to the essence. But because the experimenter's perception is unique and perhaps a little off, the subjective comes into it. Finch is fascinated by the humanness or poetry that lies in that attempt to represent something. Intrigued by the early Knafel maps that are tinged with humanness, the ones that are somehow abstracted or distorted because of the limitations of technology and perception, Finch has created a series of drawings that explore the tension between methodical measurement and individual experience. Visual records of hikes for which he matched various objects sighted along the trail to Pantone color chips, and landscapes similarly translated via a collection of carefully matched watercolor swatches elude detailed delineation, but capture the essence of the artist's encounter with nature. Pastel drawings that track the paths of a bee through a garden and map the artist's movements through a studio similarly distill meticulously gathered data into coded abstractions. The series of drawings following a bee, zinnias, is a result of Finch patiently observing and recording the unpredictable pattern of a bee migrating between flowers. Swatches of watercolor match the varied hues of the zinnias, while delicate dancing pencil lines trace the unpredictable and erratic flight patterns of the bees. Finch designed and planted a garden from seeds specifically intended for the creation of this series, making the garden a laboratory for art making. Study for Paths Through the Studio similarly traces movement, but in this case, the meanderings of the artist himself. What looks like a series of simple abstractions is actually, or also, a series of 5 maps that track the first 5 minutes of the artist's activity in his studio over the course of 5 days, each day represented by a different color. The lines signify movement, while their intersections represent various stopping points: making coffee in the kitchen, grabbing a book from a shelf, looking over a project on a work table, or checking his computer. Yellowstone Hike, Clear Lake Trail references colors found in nature. The work is a meandering line of Pantone color chips corresponding to elevations in the hiking trail that Finch traversed. Every color carefully matches that of things seen on his walk, and accordingly, each chip is labeled with its corresponding object, with inscriptions like crow, bee, grass, meadow, and dead tree branch. The viewer is invited to take the time to experience the sights and colors found on Finch's hike. Capturing the essence of the artist's encounter with nature, this drawing, like all of Finch's work, poetically distills meticulously gathered data into coded abstractions of fleeting light and color. Of the 6 artists in this exhibition, Heidi Whitman is the one whose artistic practice most directly engages with cartography. Her paper constructions, paintings, and drawings, which often incorporate bits and pieces of actual maps, reference contemporary city grids and plans of ancient ruins while mapping imagined spaces and metaphorical states of mind. With this project, Heidi considers the hidden motives of cartography. While most maps claim to be accurate and objective, they are colored by the agendas and assumptions of their creators and users. Reflecting the human desire to chart the unknown, contain chaos, control nature, and better understand the world, the Knafel maps also tell a more specific story of European conquest and empire building. Exposing ugly and unpleasant truths that are often masked by jewel-like colors, decorative patterning, and fanciful marginalia, Whitman's New World is a 3-part narrative that imagines the fear, greed, and violence that lie beneath the discovery of the New World. Conjuring the terror and anxiety that European mariners, and to a far greater and more horrific extent, enslaved peoples must have felt navigating unknown waters and the uncertainty of fate, the journey begins with a transatlantic crossing, the tumultuous ocean rendered in pieced canvas covered in a maelstrom of agitated lines. Knotted ropes suspended from the ceiling and extending out into the gallery obscure the view, adding to an unsettling sense of menace, while strips of coiled plastic hovering above suggest howling winds or twisting currents. Moving on to the second wall, we reach land. Here, a pyramidal accumulation of densely layered bits of canvas, paper, gauze, cheesecloth, foil, styrofoam, and netting takes on the conquest of the Americas. Oozing, glittering gold, oily black, and blood red, this monstrous, murderous, gluttonous mound, gorged with plunder and human victims, has reached its peak and seems to be on the verge of collapse. Finally, connecting past to present, the third wall presents modern America out of balance and spiraling out of control. Hunks of coal, fossil fuels, nuggets of gold, city grids, and urban skylines spew from the spinning ball of confusion, alongside flocks of birds attempting to fly free of the polluting toxicity of avarice, waste, and corruption.
I made New World right here in this studio over a period of 2.5 years. The studio was much too small, but somehow I managed to do it. I painted the walls a kind of dark dystopian gray, and I started out with the central middle wall and created the red pyramid, or the red mound of greed and violence. I used many different materials in the installation, ranging from found styrofoam to paint on canvas, ink and gouache on paper, cinefoil, which is heavy aluminum foil, gauze, velvet, and all sorts of other cloths, as well as a ton of gold. The second wall I worked on was the voyage across the Atlantic to the conquered New World. And for that, I wanted to convey the peril of the sea voyage, the fear of the unknown, the wind and ocean currents, and the maelstroms. And I also was thinking about the horrors of the human cargo on many of these ships. For the third wall, I had in mind to refer to contemporary America. So I have contemporary America spinning out of control with hunks of gold and coal, fossil fuels, belching out of it, landing in a big pile on the ground. I also have birds fleeing. I hope that my installation, New World, really, really resonates with people, that they see it on a visual, emotional, and visceral level, and that they really remember it. Right now, I'm sitting in my studio in Boston's South End. This is where I made most of my installation for Wayfinding at the Addison Gallery. Maps have been a very important part of my art practice for many years. In earlier work, I mapped consciousness and mental processes. I made invented terrains and mental maps. For several years, I taught a course in mapping at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University. Students used maps as inspiration to make paintings and drawings. We used the Leventhal collection at the Boston Public Library, and that meant that when I was selected for wayfinding, I knew a number of the Knafel maps. I knew right away that I wanted to explore the history of the conquest and get behind the beautiful cartography in order to address the history of violence and greed in the conquest and in contemporary America.
Liz Collins is a multimedia artist with a diverse practice that focuses on fiber and textile, resulting in both discrete objects and all-immersive installations. Similar to maps, which can be both beautiful and utilitarian, Liz's vibrant fabrics, wallpapers, carpets, stitched pieces, paintings, and installations straddle the decorative and the functional, the handmade and industrial fabricated, art and design. Their dizzying graphic patterns and explosive colors engage our senses and convey her experience of the world as a place of wonder, emotion, and boundless energy. In a recent catalog, curator and writer Glenn Addison remarked that while weaving is a slow medium of gradually accumulating material, Liz wields it like an action painter does a brush, or a punk musician plays a guitar, resulting in work that has a great gestural freedom and energy, unlike anything else in textiles. In responding to the Knafel Map Collection, Collins gravitated toward map keys, legends, and navigational grids. Eye-catching, vibrantly colorful symbols, marks, and radial lines, laden with compressed coded information that, read correctly, expands our awareness of, familiarity with, and appreciation for the vast and variegated world around us. In her multimedia installation titled Markers, Collins transforms the visual vocabulary of cartography into the abstract language of art in a range of media, including needlework, sculpture, textile, paintings, and prints. A compass rose, a symbol conveying the orientation of the cardinal directions on a map, becomes an eye-popping stitched starburst. Magnified and repeated striped scale bars create what seem to be infinitely variable rhythmic patterns. Marine chart graticules, networks of parallels and meridians, are removed from the land masses and waters they underlie to generate a series of printed geometric abstractions. A two-dimensional cartouche from a 17th century atlas takes on 3 dimensions as a sculpture made of papier-mâché and tufted fabric. In the middle of the gallery, and what one reviewer has described as the glorious centerpiece, is a long piece of patterned silk fabric suspended from the ceiling. Inspired by the striped borders surrounding many of the maps, this double-layer warp fabric is the result of the artist's collaboration with the Italian textile mill Tironi Silk. In weaving the 2 layers, one an irregular black and white striped pattern, the other a red and white striped pattern, unexpected sections of pink emerged in the process. Alternating with these woven sections are intervals of unwoven warp, silky threads as fine as hair. Rising, falling, twisting, and turning, the fabric-turned sculpture implies topography, movement, and expanse, and is testament to the seemingly endless variations generated by the deceptively simple map markers.
So something that I was really inspired by in all of the maps were the graphic elements, of course, because I love graphic elements and pattern, the mark making. So things as simple as like small, short dash lines that indicated water. Very classic elements like a compass rose that is composed of pointed triangles in a star shape that represent the cardinal directions. That was something to play with for me. Anything in the maps that felt like powerful graphic imagery that was less about land and more about containing the imagery of land and water through the frames around the maps or describing the surface of the land or water. I mean, I really focused in on the water, bodies of water, and this atlas of the sea as one thing that was really compelling to me. This idea of navigating water without, the tools that we have today and what was required for people to understand, like, these huge masses of space and water that they were dealing with and how to record that. So I felt like using abstraction was a good way for me to grapple with the kind of mind-blowing idea that cartography is. To me, like the idea of recording space and landmass and water, it's something that kind of blows my mind. And maps have always been something really compelling to me. I hope that people see the work and understand some of the connections, but also just enjoy what's in front of them. There's a piece that is very much a departure for me in this show, which is this giant map key that I pulled from this Italian map. So the paper mache trees and then this draped fabric that are from the original illustration, but like blown up to a kind of cartoon with this like bloody cloth that's kind of representing the decay and maybe the darkness of some of this work that was done to take over lands and displace people. So this sculpture, it's something different than some of the pattern elements that I was really playing with. And I guess I want to kind of push my own limits and vernacular, thinking that it might disorient people a little bit, which I want. I think one of the things I really like to do as an artist is through the work talk about my experience of whatever it is I'm taking in. In other words, like when I started looking at the Knafel collection, there was so much to see and so much to marvel at and so much antiquity and different styles of maps, and it was really overwhelming. And so when I'm creating a body of work in response to something that is that robust and overwhelming and multifaceted, I'm going to want to have some kind of message about that experience. Like, here's my experience of this resource, and all these different entry points. So I think through my work, through these many different artworks that I created with many different techniques and processes and mediums, that you get that sense of like this kind of varied, like multivalent experience that the whole thing is, making the work, taking in the maps, and then seeing that. It's been a great project, so I hope people really just enjoy all of the work in the show.
They make magic lines on the land that only they can see. Bright lights flicker, they dance across the surface of a 16 by 20 inch screen, embedded it in a wooden cabinet reminiscent of those popularized in the 1980s arcades. The light wood is raw, unfinished, maple trimmed with copper leaf, including the cabinet's buttons and gaming toggle. Brand new and never before played, the unit is absent of wear and tear, greasy fingerprints, busted features, and graffiti, characteristics common among other such public gaming consoles. The playerless game features a blank, glowing screen without sound or imagery. According to the exhibition's artist, Sonny Assu, the incisive observation in the epithet was made by a man from the Hupecheset First Nation of Vancouver, British Columbia, responding to early practices of colonial surveyorship, where settlers demarcated the boundaries of what would become the reservations where his ancestors lived. This remark, along with the fraught history of land treaties across the Americas, particularly British Columbia, is what drives several of Assu's creative investigations, including his arcade cabinets in Wayfinding. These works in front of you here, titled Land Back and Look What I Columbused To, continues in the vein of speculative interactions between First Nations people in the past, present, and future. For Wayfinding, Assu imagines ancestors moving forward in time to observe present-day Kwakwaka'wakw go about their daily lives, specifically the artist in the time of his childhood. They discover the youth captivated by these machines of flickering light and their perplexing noises, and presuming these consoles high value based on the time spent in communion with them. Together, Assu's bold graphics of appropriated maps from the Knafel Map Collection, wood and copper consoles, and a fictitious, unplayable game of boundary making, both Land Back and Look What I Columbused To, stage an impossible mission for a distracted people. Value and materiality, the two pillars in Assu's conceptual practice, highlight the cultural value of art alongside virtual reality experiences, particularly within video games, critiquing both the historic settler practice of making, quote, magic lines, end quote, on the land, and the diverting nature of contemporary digital media cultures. For the artist, the greatest irony is an ancestral assessment that assumes a worthy charge in their kin. With these bold graphic overlays of images of the Knafel maps and their wood and copper consoles, these works simultaneously critique notions of American discovery through manifest destiny and contemporary tensions between the value of technology and the time spent in front of screens.
Hi there, my name is Sonny Assu. My ancestral name is Gwagwadacha. I am Likwita of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nations. My home village is Sakwalutin of the Wewakai First Nation, and I am recording to you today from my home on the reservation of the Wewakai people. What I found interesting about the collection was that the early marine charts and maps that were used to travel the globe from Europe to what is now known as North America were in this collection. And I found it was interesting to use these maps as the basis for the graphics for my work, as a way to look at how people came to this place that is now known as North America, whether that is Canada or the United States. One of the biggest inspirations for my use of maps and marine charts in my work has come out of a quote that I had found from a Hupswith man who was observing early colonial settlers demarcating the boundaries of his reserve. And he is on record as saying, they make lines on the land, they make invisible lines on the land that only they can see, which I found was supremely interesting because this man, before contact, probably didn't have a really deep understanding of what we know now as borders and these imaginary lines on the landscape that separate specific areas from another. What is also sad about this is that he was watching settlers and colonizers draw out the boundaries of his reservation. And for a while, that reservation was a place that man wasn't allowed to leave. So it just became supremely fascinating to me to take a look at these maps and think about that quote and thinking about how a place like Canada and the United States came to be through the expansion of exploration, which brought on many negative consequences for the indigenous peoples that have been in what is now known as North America for thousands of years. Although the piece does have a heavy political reference to them, there's also a lot of play going on with these pieces and my politics. I like to use humor as a way to bring people into the conversations I'm having around Indigenous identity, Indigenous politics, and Indigenous rights. I feel if I'm able to use humor in these situations, people will be more relatable and they'll be able to understand where I'm coming from instead of coming at it at a point of anger or frustration. There's a couple different concepts that I was working on within this series of arcade cabinets, where I wanted to speculate how one of my ancestors would, if they were plucked from the timeline pre-contact and brought to the modern era, specifically when I was a kid playing video games in an arcade, how they would understand me standing in front of these machines being awashed with this glow of light. And I would assume or speculate that they would think that I was being communicated to by the spirit realm. That was kind of like the base concept for this work. But as the work has been displayed now for the past couple of years in a couple of different iterations, it dawned on me through conversations with people who have viewed the work is that they see the pieces as broken, with the glowing screen as a non-functional video game, which becomes interesting to think about when you're thinking about it in terms of Indigenous rights. That's the framework for indigeneity and Indigenous rights, and the conversations around it is broken. And it has been broken for hundreds of years. I don't think it was ever in a good start to begin with. So, yeah, I just find it interesting that new layers have been brought onto this piece as it's been exhibited. And I'm sure that there's been new conversations and life brought to the pieces that were at the exhibit. So I'm really thankful that people have been able to see this work and that they're able to understand it from their own point of view, and that they shouldn't be afraid to open up these conversations within themselves, with their neighbors, or with Indigenous peoples.
Sharing the gallery is the monumental installation titled The Westerlies, Prevailing the Winds, which is an immersive planetarium shrouded in cyanotyped canvas and depicting the night sky. The work was created by artist Andrea Chung and inspired by star charts in the Knafel Map Collection, with their images also of sea monsters and other chimerical beings. Chung inverts the assumptions of this type of map with this piece, which is a work that speculates on the navigation and forecasting techniques of Indigenous peoples in zones of discovery. The fictitious animals and human beings with exaggerated attributes depicted on these early maps reveal historic perceptions about the oceans, lands, and their inhabitants, and often served as cautions to European explorers and colonists. Building on this and her work generally, which is an incisive focus on island nations in the Caribbean Sea and the Indian Ocean, Chung imagines a context in which their people might receive warnings from the sea and sky of imminent colonial danger. In The Westerlies, Prevailing the Winds, threats of violent invasion are written in water and sky. When the viewer steps into the dome, they are immersed in aqueous blue light, and they are invited to experience the ocean and heavens as expanse and enclosure, to feel themselves, like the early seafarers, suspended between the two, and invite them to mine both the realms for omens. Included in this work is the haunting voice of the artist's son, who whispers to viewers as they begin their journey.
When I saw the map collection, I was really interested in the drawings of the sea monsters and a lot of the illustrations around the maps. The monsters I just felt were really hilarious and funny and ridiculous, and the fact that they were used as a way to warn seafarers of what was to be in those locations, as far as the natives or whales and seals. I just thought they were really amusing to me and funny, and an interesting way to warn people of something that they were just unfamiliar with. I think mapping influenced me in really thinking about various kinds of maps and how people used maps to navigate, and not necessarily just thinking about maps that were created from like a Western perspective, but thinking about star charts and that kind of navigation. And I think that led me to really think about building a planetarium. And from there, I thought a lot about the fact that those sea monsters and different illustrations around the maps were used as warning symbols. I thought about the fact that they were traveling to unknown places like the continent, and where was our warning for what was to come of the future, and how those navigators would impact the continent and other regions of the world where the enslaved were taken. I hope viewers think a lot about the way that maps can be used and how they were used historically, not necessarily for good, not necessarily for bad, but just the impact that it had on different locations. I hope that they consider the perspective of those who create those maps and the implications that come with that.